Hi guys, welcome to my channel, and this is the start of my journey to become my version of a Pokemon Master. So, I started playing through the Pokemon games for Switch, and I started screenshotting the certificates that I get for completing the Pokedexes. Of course, Legends Arceus didn't have one, so I basically just have to pull up the Pokedex and screenshot the Pokedex itself. But after doing that, I realized, what if I went back through all of the old games and played through them and got their certificates? And I started thinking, well, if I screenshot those or take pictures of those somehow, then I can post them, or not post them, but put them on my wall, like print them out, frame them, and hang them. So if you look behind me here, you'll see that I have a shrine of Pikachu. And I've been collecting Pikachus for a while. But I also have various posters and pictures throughout my house and in this room as well. And I just thought, how cool would it be to be able to show that off? And I've talked to a few friends of mine, and none of them would want to do it because it's a lot of work. If you've played any of the older games, you'll know that they're actually quite harder than the newer games. And before I get into everything, let me show you guys a few of the things that I've gotten already, or that I've collected over the years before I started doing this. So first off, I started basically with Blue version. This wasn't my first Pokemon game technically, but it is the oldest one that I have. I found this Blue version at a local used games store, and it is an authentic copy. Sadly, the internal battery has died out. So currently, it's in this weird stage of the battery's life where it does actually save, but you could be playing it for like a week or two with no problems. All of a sudden, you come back to the game, you turn it on, and all your save data is gone. Like, I once had a silver version that, in my younger days, I actually sold or gave away because the battery died, and I didn't know they could be replaced. And I regret getting rid of that silver version, but I had played silver version off and on for several weeks with no problems, and all of a sudden, my save data was gone. And I thought, oh, it's just a fluke. I didn't even realize the games had batteries, right? And so I kept playing, and of course, my save data kept disappearing over and over, and eventually it irritated me to the point where I looked it up to see if I could actually fix the problem, and apparently you could actually replace the batteries, but I didn't look it up until after I gave it away. But nowadays, older me is like, oh, don't throw that out, you can replace the batteries. So, I'm not currently playing this one because of the battery issue, and I will get to that here in a little while. But I am currently playing Red version. Now, this is a recently owned or recently purchased copy of the game. It is authentic. My channel is small, and I'm not sponsored by anybody or anything like that. But I will mention that I did buy this from DK Oldies, and it is a very good, reliable source for games. I have heard a couple things about DK Oldies not really having good game systems. I've seen some stuff online, but I can attest to buying this and having absolutely no problems with it. They replaced the battery in it. Something that I typically do whenever I get these games is I open them up and I look for things to clean. Anything from dust to corrosion to, anything that might be defective or messed up. And I have to say that this copy was perfectly fine. And it did look like somebody had opened it up and cleaned it. So, good for DK Oldies, and I will be buying future games from them. I do have it's more of a collector's version of Silver, because it's in Japanese. This is an import, although I'm not the one that imported it. The seller had gotten it imported, I think, is what the seller said. But I did open this up. This does have the original battery in it. I tested it, and the save game does not work at all, it doesn't hold a save. It is all in Japanese, and although I do know a little bit of Japanese, and I can read hiragana and stuff, I'm not fluent enough to get through any part of this game. If there's a yes or no, ine or ne, or not ne, but ine or see, that's my point. Like, my Japanese is a little rusty at this point, but I don't know enough to carry myself through this game. So, it's more of a collector's thing at this point. So, what I end up playing this on, well, it depends on my situation, where I am, because if I'm in public, I like to gloat by having an original Game Boy. Now, this I got from a friend, and it came with no battery packs or battery covers, so I actually had to order this, which is why this looks a lot newer. I was surprised to find one that actually has the Nintendo sticker, although this could be like a remake sticker. It's probably not original. This thing looks way too new to be original. Like, the sticker even has gloss on it. So unless this thing was in a time capsule, you know what I'm talking about? Like, something that you'd see in a museum. Like, this, the sticker reflects. And there's not even a scratch, like an impressional scratch on it. So I think this thing is, newly made. But, for those of you that didn't grow up in the 80s or 90s, this is what we had to deal with. So, the Game Boy SP, to my knowledge, is the first Game Boy to ever come out without any kinds of mods or anything, just stock built with a rechargeable battery. And I think it came out sometime in the early 2000s, shortly after the Game Boy Advance. So I'm talking about the Game Boy Advance SP. And it came out with the backlight and the rechargeable battery. But before that, we had to deal with this. No, they did get better. The Game Boy Color does require 2 batteries instead of 4, right? And then the Game Boy Advance also requires 2 batteries as well. But that's what we had to deal with when I was a kid, because this came out in 1990 in the US, 98 in Japan, I think, and I was born in 1990. So this came out, the release date was 2 months before I was born. So I'm technically as old as this thing, which is scary to think about. Yeah. So, interesting thing, with these games, I'm kind of bouncing around here a little bit, but I don't want to forget this. So, this is Gen 1, alright? There's blue, red, yellow, and technically green. Green was the first game to come out in Japan a year before these did. Although green is Japan exclusive, which means if I got a copy of Pokemon Green, it would be like this in Japanese. Although there are English silver version copies. And then Gen 2 is silver, crystal, and gold. Well, I'm pretty sure Gen 2 has it. I know 100% Gen 1 has it. If you complete the Pokédex and you go to a specific apartment building, there are NPCs literally created as the people of Game Freak, like the head people of Game Freak that literally founded Pokemon. They created characters, NPC characters of themselves with their names, and if you talk to one specific, he will offer you a printout copy of the diploma for completing the Pokedex. But in order to do that, you need a Game Boy printer. Now, this Game Boy printer I have not had since my childhood. This is something that I recently purchased. It has the original paper in it. I'm trying to be very careful with this thing because it is very old. But it has the original paper in it. I have not been able to test it to see if it works, although the seller has had good reviews and swears up and down that it does work. They suggested to use newer paper because this one has been sitting in the machines for a very long time. Although the paper honestly looks fine because I did buy a brand new roll of it, and it looks exactly the same, like same condition. It doesn't look as if it's aged a lot. And if you thought the batteries on the original Game Boy were bad, this one takes 6. And as far as I'm aware, you cannot plug this thing into a wall. Like, if you look around the edge, there is only one port that you already saw, and it's right here. This is the exit port where it plugs into the Game Boy original or color, depending on which one you use. It might even work for the Game Boy Advance as well. I have not tested it. But, yeah. This thing apparently does work, and I will be using it to print out paper copies of the diplomas, which I will then frame and hang on the wall. And the cool thing about the paper diplomas is that, one, it's physical copies, so you can't say, hey, so-and-so got that from the internet. No, it's a physical copy, and 2, it has whatever name that you set as your trainer at the beginning of the game on it. So unless you find someone out there that has a physical printout that has the same name as you, well, then it's probably authentic. Moving on, I do not own a Game Boy Advance, or not Advance, but Color. My girlfriend over here does. She has Game Boy Color, but it is not mine. I may eventually at some point buy one, but it is not a necessary purchase that I absolutely need to complete this project. And there are several things that I actually still need to finish this project, which is probably going to take me a while, which is why I'm deciding to record and do all of this. Next, I have my Game Boy Advance. This is a replaced battery back, although I do have the original battery back. So this Game Boy I have had for years. Now, this is not the first Game Boy Advance I have owned. I did have one prior to this, but whether it got stolen or I lost it is questionable. I was probably around 10 or 11 years old when I got my first Game Boy Advance, around there in age. And honestly, I can't tell you. I remember I had it one day and then I didn't the next. Like, I don't know if I misplaced it, although knowing me, I don't really misplace things very easily. I have a visual memory and I typically remember everywhere I put things, but regardless, after that happened, I had to go get a replacement, and it did take a couple of years to earn my parents' trust to actually buy me another one. And it wasn't long after that I ended up getting my SP. So yeah, this one does take 2 batteries. The reason it doesn't have batteries in it right now is because, just because batteries corrode if you leave them not plugged in, but inserted into things for too long. The batteries will eventually go dead, and they will leak everywhere, and it causes corrosion, and it'll build up and block your connectors. I've already had to clean corrosion off of this Game Boy, I don't know if I can show it or not. So one of the things I will be showing in this series is anytime I buy new games or consoles, I typically take them apart and clean them to make sure they're in good working condition. Because even if they do work, if there's something that's ongoing that's bad inside them, corrosion or whatever, over time it can cause more damage. So I'd rather catch it early. So I don't know how well you can see this, but if you look at the right lighting, there's actually like a slightly brown, tannish, discolored ring around the outside of that. And that's from me sanding it. It had rust on it, not just corrosion, but rust. And the connection was so bad that I'd put the battery in and it wouldn't work. I'd leave the on switch to on, and then I'd rotate this battery and shift it, and the power light would actually flicker, as if there's an electronic connection, you know, the electric connection. So I took it apart and I sanded it down, and it still messes up whenever this battery gets moved, but instead of it flickering on, it flickers off, if you know what I mean. Like, it's exact opposite. It works much better. And that's one of the main reasons I actually ordered this battery back, is because, one, it looks better, two, it protects, you know, whatever's under it, and three, it stops my fingers from accidentally touching the batteries. So if I forget to save and I go through like 2 different Pokemon gyms and I touch that, it saves me a lot of headache. So yeah, I will show later on whenever I get new things, cleaning, and typically I just take them apart with a set of screwdrivers and use alcohol and cotton swabs. I actually just bought a 90% isopropyl alcohol, which is probably better than this one to use on electronics, but I can get to that in another video. Back to the Game Boy Advance. It's not perfect. I went through a phase where I was actually playing it regularly, playing through Blue version actually, before I lost my save. And I had completed the game 100% except for... Is that a crack? I think that's a crack. Yep, that's definitely a crack. Before the battery in it went bad. Yeah, it's definitely a crack. Let's not mess with that too much. But I was carrying around in my lunchbox that I take for work. It is a Pikachu lunchbox, fuzzy, it's got ears on it. Total nerdy, like 5-year-old lunchbox, but I don't care, I use it. But if you look in the power slots, you'll see a couple of dark spots here in the corner and over here. So I also love Asian food. There's a little bit there. I love Asian food, and I would a lot of times take imported instant ramen that I got from local Asian grocery stores here in town. Take those to work when I was a bachelor with this in my lunchbox. And because of that, I would also take packets of soy sauce. Well, one day, worse came to worse, right? Like, the worst actually happened, and a soy sauce packet burst without my knowledge. Got all over this thing. It got in the buttons. It got everywhere. Fortunately, it didn't short circuit this thing. Like, it still worked, but the buttons were sticky. Not like half the buttons didn't even want to work properly. Like, I couldn't spam click them or anything. So I didn't use it because, one, I knew if I used it, it'd probably get worse. And two, I didn't want to screw up my Game Boy that I've had for years. So after I got my screw kit, I took it apart and I used the alcohol and cleaned most of it out. There's still a little bit that I wasn't able to get, but the majority of it I cleaned up, and you can't even tell that the buttons were actually dirty because I pulled the buttons out and scrubbed them. So, yeah. With retro games comes retro responsibilities. And when I say retro responsibilities, because you have to use the old arts of cleaning. So after the Game Boy Advance, of course, is the Advance SP. I'm not entirely sure if this was mine or my brother's, although I do remember losing mine, and I thought my brother had taken it, and years later he gave me this one. So I'm not entirely sure if this was actually mine originally, or if mine actually got stolen, and, because, yeah. And this is my brother's. Either way, I have a Game Boy SP, and, I've done some cleaning on it, but it doesn't really need a lot of cleaning. I mean, I see some stuff that could be cleaned up, so I may eventually take it apart and clean it, but, this is what I will be mainly playing the games on, just because it is compatible with Game Boy Original and Game Boy Color, and it is rechargeable, and, it has a backlight. Oh my god! See, you guys that are younger, you don't understand. You're born in an age where cell phones have backlights, okay? You know, I grew up with a cell phone, and a brand called Nokia, which I'm not sure. I know it still exists, but I think it's bought out by another phone company. Anyway, I had a cell phone that did not have a backlight on it. So this technology in the early 2000s was revolutionary for electronics, and without stuff like this, your cell phones probably would not have backlights. Your TVs, we won't have LCD or LED or whatever they are, LED backlights. So LEDs. I'm pretty sure this is a LED. And if I turn it on, if you look in the corner, I don't know if you can see. Nah, you can't see that. But there's actually little. You can see the lights on the sides, lighting up the screen. But yeah, this is what I'll be playing the games on for the most part in the videos. After that, after this, there was the Game Boy Micro, which I don't have one. And then after that, as far as I'm aware, they started making the DS series, the original DS, the 2DS, and then the 3DS, which I don't have a DS original or a 2DS, but I did go out and buy a 3DS. It cost me like $200. You can see the price tag, $180 plus tax, of course. But this is what I will be playing my Pokemon games on for this generation, such as Sun and Moon, Heart Gold, Soul Silver, or currently what I've been playing is Omega Ruby. So I'm gonna actually, I did play into this a little bit, and the whole reason I bought this one this early, before completing the other games before it, is because I was trying to complete my Pokedex for Home, Pokemon Home, and I needed a Spinda. But interesting fact, Spinda from the Switch versions of the game is not Home compatible. And the reason for this is because in Ruby and Sapphire and Emerald, Spinda has a series of spots that are randomized, and no two Spindas are the same, essentially. Actually, I guess there could be a chance, but it'd be extremely rare, and you'd probably never come across it, because it's like in the 1 to like billions. So because of that, only the older generation Spindas can actually make it into the Pokemon Home. So I had to go out and get a Pokemon Omega Ruby, because I can move it from the 3DS into Pokemon Bank, and then move it from Bank to Pokemon Home. Now, I was really hoping that I could just use my original Ruby version that I have here for the Advance and SP and Micro, if you will. But there were too many steps to actually transfer this onto the 3DS to where I could then put it in Pokemon Bank. and it was just a lot easier to go buy a 3DS and a copy of Omega Ruby. I do have a few other Game Boy Advance Pokemon games. I have the Pokemon Sapphire, okay? And Ruby and Sapphire are the first Pokemon games that I've ever actually owned, which is really sad growing up in the 90s. My family just wasn't fortunate enough to afford my gaming interest, if you will. If I did have anything, they were older systems, so I actually grew up with like Super Nintendos, even though they're before my my generation. But yeah, Pokemon Sapphire, and after that I bought Fire Red and played through the entire game, and only found out recently that Fire Red is actually a modernized version of Pokemon Red. And I don't know why it took me years to realize that, but I never thought about it because I never played Red version, ever. Although whenever I did pick up Pokemon Blue version, I realized that it was very similar to this one. I just never really gave it any thought. I know, some Pokemon fan I am, right? So, as far as connector cords and stuff, I do have a couple of Game Boy Advance link cables I've had for years. I did have to go and pick up this link cord. It does look like it's new, so I don't know if it was just in packaging for years, but it is all black. And I would think that an old cable for one of these would be gray, because gray was a very popular color for new tech back in the 80s and 90s. And so the fact that this cord is black is very modernized look, and I think it might be a newer cord. Either way, it does work, and it does have some age to it. I don't know if you can see, this metal actually has some spots on it, so it's not shiny brand new. It does show signs of age, but this cord, this fat end actually plugs into the original Game Boy, and then these two ends will plug into the Game Boy Color or the printer. So this cable will allow me to link the Game Boy printer with the original Game Boy, or just the original Game Boy to the Game Boy Advance, and so on and so forth. If you notice, this cord actually is like a rectangle, I guess you could say, with a couple of the cut corners on the top. Whereas the port, Game Boy Advance, has that little extra bit at the top. It's almost like a steeple, right? So even though this fits in there, it is actually backwards compatible, which I did not ever see online. So something that you might have you might remember when the PS3 came out is that everybody was complaining that it wasn't very backwards compatible. The reason for this is because in the 90s and the 2000s, backwards compatibility was a regular thing for video games. The Game Boy SP that literally came out in the mid-2000s can actually connect to the Game Boy Advance, because this cord that plugs to the Game Boy original plugs into the Advance, and it is compatible. But the Advance cable is not compatible with the Game Boy original, so you have to have this older cord, but it still works. You can trade and everything. Something that I also learned is that these older games, they don't recognize the Game Boy Advance cords. Like, I can plug them, I can boot the games up on Game Boy Color or Advance or SP, well, not Color, but Advance and SP, and use the Advance cord link cable, and the games just don't recognize the cord's presence. It's something to do with the technology. I don't know exactly how it works, but I know whenever I plugged this cord in for the connector, the game immediately recognized it. So if you're ever wanting to trade with the older games, you're going to need an original cord, a Game Boy original link cable, okay? That's pretty much all I got for the games. Now to talk about other stuff. I was talking about cleaning earlier. I will be showing cleaning. I will be showing unboxing whenever I buy new consoles or new games. I will be taking you guys through my journey to become a Pokemon master. That's the whole point of this. I eventually am going to have to get a soldering set, because the only way to remove these batteries is with a soldering gun, and I already have this battery to replace, so I pretty much have no choice unless I want to pay someone else to do it. But what fun is that? Like, anytime I pick up a hobby, I like to learn new things, and part of this hobby is soldering. If anything goes wrong, if they get broken, if they corrode, you can pretty much fix almost anything with the soldering irons. And if there are different like transistors or whatever that break inside these, you can actually buy those parts and solder them back in with solder the new parts back in, and they work just fine. I've seen videos of it on YouTube. So soldering is a practice that I will be getting into through this series that I'm making for my journey. I have already started playing through Pokemon Red. I think I'm on my 5th gym badge, going on to my 6th. So I started recording yesterday, and I am currently stuck in the Safari Zone. I've picked up the Golden Teeth, and I am simply just trying to catch all the Pokemon in the Safari Zone. And if you know anything about the original game... Hello, Diablo. Video bombing. The original games have a Safari Zone with a couple Pokemon in it where it's literally a 4% chance encounter, and then they run. Like, it's really hard to catch them. So far, I have put 2 hours into catching Chansey. And after that, I have put roughly 5 hours into trying to catch a Kangaskhan. And I come across them about one every 5 to 10 minutes, and they're so hard to catch, it's basically luck. And I put 5 hours into it with nothing. But for now, I'm just trying to give an intro to my journey and what I'm doing. And I'll see you on the next video, because I gotta catch them all.